Well, hello everybody, and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DeCosta, and this is Consistent Preterism. Thank you for joining me today. Hope everybody's doing well out there. You know it's going to be a good one when I have a bunch of empty bottles and trash on the floor of my passenger seat. I just know that usually when that happens, I'm just like a maniac cruising down the road, just spitting fire. So today we're going to talk about Acts chapter 9. And this is a passage that is sometimes used against IO, actually quite often. I would say it's probably one of the top 5. Some may disagree. I'm sure some would agree. But Acts 9, it's making a declaration about the Apostle Paul. Now, if we know anything about the Apostle Paul, we know that the story sets him out to be this sort of 13th offshoot apostle that was going to the nations as the chief of sinners. And he was the self-proclaimed, self-titled apostle to the nations. So there's no secret that his ministry was to the ethne, to the ethnos, to the nations. So we have that declaration made all throughout the New Testament, and nobody would dare argue with that, okay? So when we come to Acts chapter 9, we're getting another look at that same theme, that same concept, that Paul is an apostle to the nations. And there's a declaration made, and I'm not going to pull it up while I'm driving, because like I said, I'm a maniac cruising with, a whole dumpster full of empty Gatorade bottles and whatnot, because I do drink a lot. I sweat a lot when I work, so I drink when I'm doing construction, not when I'm in the office, but you get the point. Going off on a tangent here. But anyway, so Paul, they declare in Acts 9 that Paul is a chosen vessel of God's, right? God has chosen him as a vessel, and it says to bear the name before kings, nations, and the children of Israel. Okay, now, people often use that and say, look, Paul was bringing the message of salvation to kings, nations, and the children of Israel. And I say, yeah, that's exactly what he was doing. He was bringing the message geographically out to the nations. So the thing that you have to understand is that a lot of these passages in the New Testament, they describe this occurrence differently, right? They're not all going to be the same. They all use different words. They use different terminology. They approach it from different angles. But you have to have a little bit of a mind for it, a little bit of an eye for it. But it's sort of like, I don't know, poetry, if you will. It's just a lot of it sometimes is dumb. It's not the way that we would say things, but it's the way that the Bible does. So when it says that he was a chosen vessel to bear the name before nations, kings, and the children of Israel, what it's doing there is it's lumping those three things together in one category. As they're one group. They come together as a group, and they come together as a group, or they're offered in one category because they're all in the same place geographically. Okay, I'll repeat that. They are all mentioned in Acts 9 as a group, that being the nations, the kings, and the children of Israel, because they were all together geographically. They were all in the regions that Paul was going to proclaim the gospel to, and he was the chosen vessel for that. He was the apostle to the nations. So what this shows then, without any doubt, at the very least, is that the, quote, children of Israel were among the nations, right? I mean, it's case closed. It's an open and shut case, right? It links these three together geographically. Now, you may say, no, it doesn't. Well, you can argue that those are the Jews there, right? The children of Israel would be the Jews there. But that makes absolutely no sense, because Paul was not a chosen vessel to take the gospel to the Jews. We all know that, right? That was Peter, James, John, right? They had that ministry, and that's well declared. So Paul comes along later to take the message to the nations, okay? And so if you fall into the brick, or back yourself into the brick wall and try to argue this, then you have to explain who the children of Israel are in Acts 9, because you'd have to argue that they're Jews, and then you'd have to change up the story and say that Paul was a chosen vessel to bring the message to the Jews, and that, of course, doesn't work. So, therefore, we just proved that the children of Israel were in the same places geographically that the nations and kings were, which is obviously the nations, right? So they were among the nations. Some had even become or some said they would even become the nations, some of the Old Testament texts. So here we have this scattered group of children of Israel among the nations where Paul is going to bring this good news, right? How sweet are the feet of those who come preaching the news, saying, Christ has forgiven you of your trespasses. He has forgiven you of your trespass of being uncircumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, which was a covenant commandment made to your fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he has nailed the handwritten requirements of the law to the cross, he told them. He has, with his blood, he has fulfilled the required ordinances, stuff like that. Ephesians, Colossians, it's all there. Galatians, he died under the law to redeem those under the law. That's the law of Moses. Hebrews said he died he died for sins, transgressions committed under the first covenant. That's Hebrews 8, I believe. So all these clear, unambiguous, no other way around them texts are stated very, very clearly. And then we have the implied, indirect statements, like telling someone in Ephesus that that Christ had nailed their transgressions of the handwritten requirements of the law to the cross. I mean, if you can't provide the handwritten requirements that Gentile was under, then you don't have a case. It's just as simple as that. So anyway, Acts chapter 9 proves without any doubt that the children of Israel were among nations and kings. Okay. Now, the argument will be made that Paul was a chosen vessel to bring the message so that they all could be saved, right? Nations, kings, and the children of Israel that were among them, right? That would be more in line with, I think, like a Jason Staples position, where the gospel goes out as sort of like a big dragnet and just kind of scoops up everybody it can at the same time that it's scooping in the lost tribes of the house of Israel, the lost sheep, the northern kingdom, right? So it's like this massive net that goes out, and just anybody who can jumps in, and they come along for the ride, right? And they get eternal glory, immortal glory, just jumping in on a promise that was so sacred to the fathers. So anyway, that's Jason Staples' view, and that is, the argument that some might make here is that, well, yeah, I mean, they'd have to admit that the children of Israel here are not the Jews, right? Because Paul wasn't an apostle to the Jews. And it's declaring what he was chosen for, right? Like, get over yourself if you can't admit that. So they'd have to say then that the gospel went out by Paul for more than one reason, right? It was for the children of Israel and the kings and the nations, right? Like all a big mixed bag. Well, that doesn't really work either. In my opinion, Acts chapter 9 is basically stating who Paul was going to, right? An obvious statement: nations, kings, and the children of Israel. But the importance is on the children of Israel. It's the last batch mentioned in that group. They were among them. They were the sheep being sought after. And Paul makes this clear in an abundance of ways. For instance, Romans chapter 9, where he's asking about the mercy falling on the Gentiles, the ethne, the ethnos. And he quotes Hosea, which is a literal passage all about the lost sheep of the house of Israel being brought back into the fold. And Paul's quoting it when asking about his Gentiles, right? So, anyway, do we really think that if Paul's quoting Hosea and identifying his Gentiles as the not a people of Hosea, which is the children of Israel, and then he quotes Isaiah, which says Isaiah also cries out concerning Israel, though the number of the children of Israel will be as the sand of the sea, the remnant will be saved. Do we really think that Acts 9 is describing Paul any other way? Like, what is he doing? Is he gathering in the children of Israel, or is he gathering in kings and nations and the children of Israel? Doesn't make sense. Romans 9, he says that the ones he's gathering in are actually the children of Israel. So, very, very easy to see. Let's see, what else can we say? Bear with me a moment. And what would a king or a pagan actually need saving from, right? Because the whole point of the New Testament, its whole, thrust and its whole message basically is that the law imputed the sin, right? The law is what made them guilty. The law of Moses. There is no other law in focus. It's not a dumb story, right? It's a very clear-cut story. It's telling you a story about those under the law of Moses, the ministry of condemnation and death that Paul so clearly calls it. Paul's not jumping back and forth from talking about the law of Moses in one breath and then some silly universal heart law in the next. That's the idea of a lot of wannabes, and they really go out on a limb to try to convince people that Paul had this schizophrenic kind of bipolar dialogue going on about two different laws. And it's just not the case. And we can see that clearly from places like Romans 2, where he's speaking about, quote, the law. And he says when, Gentiles who do not have the law by nature sometimes do some of the things that the law requires, they show the work of the law is written in their hearts. And then he the next sentence he says, but you, a Jew who rests on the law, do you then tell people to break the law? So, in other words, Paul's using the term the law the same way, whether or not he's speaking about the Gentiles or the Jews. And because he uses it that way when clearly speaking about the Jews and how they were handling the law, right? We know the Jews only had one law. That's the Mosaic law. So then clearly the law is also the Mosaic law when Paul is speaking about the Gentiles who had it on the heart. That the law is the law of Moses that they had on their heart. And that comes strictly from the Old Testament as well, where that was a promise that was made to them and their descendants after them. And so there's all these little ways that you can prove IO, right? It's just that easy to do. It's not hard. Acts 9 is actually an IO proof text, but imagine that. All this time they've been using it as an IO argument against IO, but it's actually a strong IO proof text because it proves that Paul's ministry was at the very least, right? The very least, the Israelites were out in the nations, right? That's what Acts 9 is so clearly saying, at the very least, right? There's no getting around that. And then it just becomes an argument of, well, did he mean to say, was he trying to say that he was saving kings, nations, and the children of Israel from the nations? Or was he just stating the obvious as to what Paul's mission was? Take it geographically and bear it before kings, nations, and the children of Israel. And we see that come into play in Acts, right? I mean, that's exactly what happens. Paul is standing before the council, and what does he say? He says, for the hope of the 12 tribes, I'm bound in these chains, the hope of the fathers. So he's telling them, he's standing before kings and letting them know what he's doing, right? What he's bringing to them. He's bringing to them the message for the hope of the fathers, gathering in the 12 tribes, right? What was the hope of the fathers? Well, it was the restoration of all things. It was the restoration of the kingdom of Israel. It was the rejoining of them together as one. Acts 1, by the way, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? So you can see how I can keep weaving it in and out, making connections without even trying, because when you have the right narrative, it just flows. It just happens. People hate that. They don't want that. I've been challenging people like Mike Karras to a debate on it, a live discussion. He doesn't want it. Just get in the ring, right? Let's throw some punches. Let's have some fun. Don Preston, I'd love to sit and do it live with you. We can do it on any channel. Derek from Myth Vision, I'd love to do a live with you. We can throw some haymakers at each other. I guarantee that'll be a good old time. Anyone can get the strap. So, and that's said with good intention. That's said with love and a little bit of, busting chops. But the reality is that IO is prepared to take this to the next level. Okay. IO is 150% scriptural, contextual, honors the trajectory, doesn't assume or presume things, doesn't try to write itself into the story, and it's ready for war. So anybody want to step up? If you're a reputable human within the academic or theological world, especially theological, I would love to rip into some of these supposed masters of the Bible. Anyone with a big name, I don't care who you are, anyone. If you have a big following, I will come on your show. I promise you. If you have 1 million followers and you want to debate this topic and just have a discussion, I don't do debates, I do discussions, so we can have a man-to-man or a man-to-woman, and I will absolutely 150% embarrass you on your own channel. So I can assure you of that. So let's do it. Let's have a good old-fashioned talking, a little debate, a little discussion, and let's see where it all lands. Anyway, rambling. Hope you all enjoyed it. Acts 9 in the bag. Another IO proof text. Just makes IO the monster all the more that it is. And yeah, it's pretty much all I got. So if you liked it, give it a like, a Rooski. If you like the trash talking, definitely leave a comment. Let me know. Sometimes I get a little fired up. And like I told you, when there are empty bottles in the truck, some weird shit's going down. So anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Everybody, have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.